この音なんだ。キングエンジン知らないのか。キングさんが戦闘態勢に入った時に鳴る音だよ。この音を聞いて生きて帰った怪人はいないと言われてんだ。
You're known as the strongest man alive. People trust you, fear you, and count on you without question. You rarely speak, but when you do, everyone listens. When danger appears, all eyes turn to you. This is your story, from the front lines of battle, through the silence between attacks, and into the moments no one sees. So, everyone call you King. That's your identity now. But this wasn't always the case. You used to be a regular kid who loved video games more than anything else. You weren't brave or athletic or particularly special, but you were good with a controller in your hands, and that was enough. Winning tournaments gave you confidence, made you feel like maybe you had a place in the world, even if it was behind a screen. For a long time, that was the only place you ever felt in control. Then, one day, you were walking home like usual when the monster called Octopus Claw Man appeared out of nowhere. You froze like your body didn't belong to you anymore, and before you could even scream properly, you were on the ground, bleeding, staring at the sky while pain shot through your side. That's when he showed up. He didn't say anything heroic, didn't pose, didn't even look serious. He just ended it and left, as if none of it had been a big deal, while you lay there useless, clutching at your side with 3 fresh scars to remember it by. And it didn't stop there. It kept happening. Monsters would attack, you'd freeze, and he'd appear. Always silent, always a step ahead, always cleaning up the mess while you stood off to the side, heart pounding, legs locked in place. You didn't even have the words to thank him because he'd vanished before you could catch your breath. Then, one day, he defeated Vaccine Man. The explosion of his body sent blood and guts flying everywhere, and you happened to trip and fall into it right as people arrived. They thought you were the one who'd done it, and you didn't correct them. You should have, but you were still shaking and confused, and before you knew it, the moment had passed. They handed you credit for the fight, they put your name in articles, and the Hero Association came calling with promises of recognition, power, and money. You didn't even take the exam, they just gave you the title of a S-class hero, and just like that, you became known as the strongest man on Earth. All because you happened to be standing near the wreckage after someone else did all the work. At first, you thought the misunderstanding would clear itself up, that someone would ask questions or realize the truth, or that maybe Saitama would speak up and set the record straight. But no one did, not even him. And you didn't either. You just went along with it because stopping it felt harder than letting it continue. Before long, it became something bigger than you, a reputation too massive to escape from. You didn't fight monsters, but they gave you medals. You didn't protect cities, but they paid you like you did. All you did was survive, and somehow that was enough for everyone except you. You didn't want to be there, not in that meeting, not anywhere near the words S-Class or Hero Association. But once again, you had no choice. When the alarms went off and the building shook under the force of the dark matter thieves' attack, you did what you always do, stayed still, kept your head down, waited for someone stronger to clean up the mess. But then Saitama, without hesitation, punched a hole straight through the roof and disappeared into the chaos above. And you, with no real plan and no other way out, quietly climbed up through the hole he'd left behind, hoping no one would notice. But they noticed. Now you're standing on the roof, surrounded by some of the strongest heroes on the planet. You're sweating under your coat. You can feel the tension in the air, and worse, you can feel their eyes shifting toward you. Then it happens. Super Alloy Darkshine turns to you, his expression almost innocent, and asks for your opinion, on how to deal with the enemy ship floating in the sky like a hovering nightmare. There's a silence. You can hear it. That awful rumble in your chest. The so-called King Engine, really just your heart hammering against your ribs like it's trying to escape. You panic just a little, but manage to keep your face still. You tell them there's nothing you can do. You think it's enough, but their looks ask for more, so you scramble and say the ship is too far up, that someone like Metal Knight would be more useful in this situation. You try to sound calm, rational, like you're just being tactical, like you're holding back for a reason. But Tatsumaki's voice slices through the air, sharp and unforgiving. She calls you pathetic, says a real hero would have acted already. That people have died, cities have been destroyed, and yet here you are still playing it safe. You want to say something back, but the words don't come. You just stand there locked in place, pretending it doesn't hurt. But before things get worse, Darkshine steps in, warning her not to provoke you, saying you might kill her if she pushes too far, and suddenly, she goes quiet. That's the kind of fear your reputation carries now. People think you're a monster in disguise, a silent god waiting to unleash devastation. And all the while, you're just standing there, hoping no one notices that your hands are shaking. Then one day, you were just out for a walk. Nothing special, just a quiet afternoon in M-City, trying to enjoy a moment of peace and maybe clear your head. The alien invasion was over, thanks to Saitama, though no one seemed to remember that part. And now the streets were slowly returning to normal. People smiled a little more, shops reopened, and for a second, it felt like you might finally get to breathe, but then you saw him. Tongue Stretcher. One of those twisted, second-rate monsters who preyed on the weak, the kind that didn't destroy cities, but ruined lives in smaller, uglier ways. You froze on instinct, not because he was powerful, but because this was exactly the kind of moment you feared most. A real hero would step in. A real hero wouldn't hesitate. But you're not that hero, and you never have been. Still, you stood there, caught between panic and guilt, wondering what excuse you could use to back away without drawing attention. And that's when the wind betrayed you. Your hood flew back and suddenly you weren't some guy on the street. You were king. The strongest man alive. The king engine kicked in, your heart pounding so loudly it seemed to echo off the buildings. And Tongue Stretcher turned to face you. At first, he just looked confused. Then his face twisted, eyes wide with fear, as if some invisible force was pressing down on him. You didn't move. You didn't speak. But to him, and to everyone around, it looked like you were unleashing something terrible. That stare, the shaking in your chest, the silence, it all added up to something far more terrifying than you ever intended. A bystander recognized you, shouted your name. That was enough to seal the illusion. Tongue Stretcher dropped to his knees, begging for forgiveness, sobbing so hard it looked like he was having a seizure. The crowd gathered instantly, shouting your name, cheering you on, praising your presence like you were some divine force sent to bring justice. Some of them shouted insults at the monster. Others shouted questions at you. A few shouted confessions of love. Someone asked if you'd sensed the monster. You said you were just out shopping, trying to keep your voice steady. Someone else said your face looked angry, like you were about to explode, but you calmly brushed off your cap and muttered that you were in a hurry. You just needed a little space. And somehow, that worked. The crowd immediately shifted, making way for you, as if your request had been a royal decree. They apologized, stepped back, gave you room. Not because they understood, but because they were afraid of what might happen if they didn't. You walked away slowly, heart still thudding in your chest, trying not to look like you were running from everything around you, because once again you hadn't done anything, but you were treated like you'd done everything. And no matter how often it happens, that never stops feeling like a weight you can't carry. You had one goal that day: pick up Doki Doki Sisters, get home, and spend the evening immersed in something simple and familiar. A new dating sim, untouched and full of promise, was exactly the escape you needed. No monsters, no reporters, no impossible expectations. Just you, your console, and digital romance. And for a brief moment, it felt like the world was finally letting you have that. Then you heard the screaming. It was faint at first, distant enough that you almost ignored it. But then the ground shook. Something massive landed behind you, casting a shadow over the pavement. And when you turned around, your heart sank. A giant robot, sleek, armored, unnatural, stood there like it had dropped straight from the sky. It introduced itself as G4, something called a machine god, from an organization you'd never heard of. And it said it came to kill you, not challenge you, not threaten, kill. Someone in the crowd spotted you and shouted your name. And just like that, everything flipped again. The fear, the chaos, the panic of the moment, all of it vanished from their faces and was replaced with hope. People stopped running, some even smiled. They cheered and raised their phones, convinced that your presence meant they were safe. Because of course you'd win. You always win. That's what they believe. So you did what you've done too many times before. You acted. You asked the robot who it was, warned it who you were. Rank 7, S-Class, the strongest man on Earth. You tried to hold your voice steady. It didn't work. G4 didn't flinch. It didn't even pause. It just lifted a massive sword and brought it down toward your head. You barely dodged. your cap flying off as you stumble backward. The machine didn't care about your title, your reputation, your myth. It just kept repeating its objective like a machine following a checklist. This was some kind of AI performance test, it said, as if your life was just part of an experiment. You had no idea what it was talking about, so you latched onto the only thing you could think of and told it you needed to use the bathroom before you fought, saying you wouldn't be at full power otherwise. It was a desperate excuse, but somehow it worked. G4 gave you 10 minutes, said if you didn't return, 10 people would die every minute. If you ran, the entire city would be gone. You walked into the nearest restroom, heart pounding, hands shaking. Your game slipped from your grip and clattered onto the floor. You started to breathe faster, too fast. You couldn't slow it down. Your chest tightened as the truth closed in. This robot wasn't like the others. It didn't care about rumors or fear or the illusion that had protected you for so long. It was here for a fight, and there was nothing standing between you and death this time. You tried to think of something, anything, a trick, a bluff, some way out, but there was nothing, no plan, no luck, just raw panic. So you did the only thing you could do. You ran. You picked up your game, held it close, and slipped out the back. You didn't stop to look back. You didn't even know that Genos had already engaged the machine. You just ran, quietly apologizing to everyone you were leaving behind. Because once again, the world had mistaken your fear for power, and you couldn't live up to the lie. As you get back in your apartment, you finally feel like you could breathe again. The door was locked, the curtains were drawn, and the city, the expectations, the lies, the monsters, was far below. You powered on your game system, still clutching the copy of Doki Doki Sisters like it was some kind of life raft. This was supposed to be your escape, a bit of comfort after yet another close call. You hovered at the name entry screen, unsure what to type. It was a dumb thing to get hung up on, but your mind was still racing. Should you use your real name? Something cool? Something ironic? That was when a voice beside you casually suggested using your hero name. You nearly jumped out of your seat. You hadn't even noticed him. Saitama, sitting there like he'd always been part of the room. He mentioned the window was open, and you blinked at him, stunned because you live on the 22nd floor. But to him, apparently, that's just a minor detail. No explanation, no apology, just a statement of fact. You tried to play it tough, leaning into the S-Class persona, hoping your reputation might make him second-guess his decision to barge into your life uninvited. But of course, it didn't work. He just stared at the game screen and asked why you bought a dating sim. Completely unfazed, you scrambled for an excuse, anything to make this seem less embarrassing than it already was. You told him you'd meant to buy an action game, that the title threw you off. It sounded weak even as you said it, but Saitama didn't push. Instead, he suggested playing a robot battle game, said the dating sim probably bored you, which is why you ran away earlier. You felt your stomach twist. He didn't even realize he was hitting the nerve directly. You gave in and played, gripping the controller with a quiet resentment boiling inside you. You didn't hate him, not really, but his presence felt like a disruption, like a casual gust of wind that knocked over everything you were barely keeping together. All you'd wanted was some time alone, some peace, a game that didn't remind you of reality. Then, without warning, he asked about G4, said Genos was fighting it now, in your place. You choked on your juice, your heartbeat spiked, that familiar thundering pulse surging in your chest like a warning alarm. You stared at the screen but didn't see it anymore. You were scrambling inside, trying to come up with something, anything, that could explain why you weren't the one out there, why you weren't doing what they all believed you could do. But even in the middle of your panic, you didn't realize what Saitama was really thinking. He wasn't judging you, he wasn't suspicious, he thought you understood him, he thought you were just like him, and somehow that only made everything worse. You thought you were finally done with surprises. Saitama was sitting next to you, your secret was on the verge of unraveling, and you were barely holding yourself together. Then, without warning, it all shattered, again. A deafening screech split through the air, and before you could react, something massive burst through your apartment window, tearing the place apart like it was made of paper. A demon-level giant crow, eyes wild and focused, came diving straight in. It was like the world was determined to drag you back into a nightmare, no matter how many times you tried to hide from it. You froze, of course, because what else could you do? You're not a fighter, you never have been. But before you could even scream, Saitama spoke, calm and casual as always, like this was just another errand on his to-do list. He said the crow was probably after you, and that you had no choice but to fight it. Your knees locked, your mouth went dry, and as the monster advanced, you finally broke. You shut your eyes and shouted the truth, everything. That it was all a lie, every headline, every story, every battle they thought you'd won. You confessed it all because if you were going to die, you didn't want to die pretending anymore. But the death never came. Instead, you heard a sudden whoomp, the unmistakable sound of something hitting the floor hard. You slowly opened your eyes, bracing for the worst, and there was Saitama, standing there. The giant crow already defeated, its body motionless behind him like it had never been a threat at all. He turned to you with a neutral expression, not angry, not surprised, just observant. He looked down at the mess, at you shaking, and at the stains spreading across your pants. You wanted the floor to swallow you whole. Then he said it. He'd figured it out. That your strength, your history, everything people believed about you was made up. And yet, his voice wasn't cruel, he wasn't laughing or disappointed. He just asked if you were okay, and for a second you couldn't answer. That's when it hit you. All those monsters, all those near-death escapes, all the times you were saved before the fight ever reached you. It had always been him. Saitama, the man everyone ignored, the one who never took credit. He was the reason you were still alive. The guilt welled up so quickly it overwhelmed you. You apologized, voice cracking, the words spilling out in a rush because it was the only thing you could offer. You told him you were sorry for taking credit that was never yours, that you didn't deserve the praise, the position, any of it. But he didn't seem to care. He asked if it was fun, pretending to be a hero while living in constant fear. You told him no, it wasn't fun. It never had been. Then he asked if you were going to keep pretending or finally give it up, and you couldn't even answer that either. You told him the truth, that you didn't have the guts to decide. He looked at you for a moment, then simply said, "Then become stronger," like it was the most natural thing in the world, and then, just as casually, he said he might come by again sometime, maybe play some games, like none of this had to change anything at all. You watched him leave, the wreckage of your apartment still settling behind him. And for the first time in a long while, the weight on your chest felt just a little bit lighter, because someone finally saw you for who you really were, and didn't walk away. You two kind of became buddies. Saitama enjoyed playing with you, though he always lost, but you also felt good around him, probably because he never judged you, and you could be yourself. One day, you went to Saitama's place because you left your portable console there, and figured it was better to retrieve it before you lost more than just your peace of mind. The place was the same as before, messy, casual, lived in, but it had a strange comfort to it. Like Saitama's whole existence naturally rejected pressure and expectation. Maybe that's why people like Genos and now you kept finding their way back to him. Saitama handed you your console like it was no big deal, casually mentioning that he'd erased the saved data. You stared at the screen, felt the moment of silence stretch, but surprisingly it didn't bother you. Not really. You told him it was fine, though you did point out that the action button was broken, just to be petty about something. He just shrugged. That's when Fubuki walked in, saw you standing there, and froze for a moment like her brain couldn't quite process the scene. You saw it on her face, confusion, curiosity, and a trace of disbelief. To her, and probably everyone else, S-class heroes weren't supposed to hang out in small apartments with chipped floors and in discount noodles on the counter. Then the call came in, Hero Association Dispatch. They wanted you to help protect Narinki and his son, the kind of high-stakes assignment meant for people who actually knew what they were doing. You stared at your console screen, still flickering slightly, and without missing a beat, you told them you were busy. Said you were in the middle of defeating a monster. And technically, you weren't lying. It just happened to be a monster in a video game. No one questioned it. You grabbed your jacket, told yourself you were going to pick up some manga, and made your way through the strangely empty streets of the city. That's when you saw him, standing alone under a flickering streetlight, staring off into space like he'd lost something he couldn't quite explain. You almost turned back, unsure if he wanted company, but you didn't. Instead, you walked up beside him and casually said you were just on your way to buy some manga. Then you told him the truth, or part of it at least, that he looked kind of sad. He didn't argue, so the two of you stood there, talking not like heroes, but like two people who weren't sure what the word hero even meant anymore. He told you about the emptiness he felt, how none of it really satisfied him. The fights, the wins, the recognition, none of it gave him what he thought it would. You wanted to help, wanted to say something that mattered, even if you had to borrow it from the back pages of a manga volume. You quoted it like it was your own, the kind of line that sounds profound and simple all at once, and for a second, he actually seemed to take it in. You told him you'd come over later to play games, promised to play with just 2 fingers, just to make it fair. Later, somehow, despite using only 2 fingers, you kept beating him. Over and over again, Saitama sat there with that blank, mildly annoyed expression, while your character racked up another flawless win. It wasn't luck. You were just good at this. Video games were one of the few places where you didn't have to fake it. Saitama didn't seem to mind. If anything, he looked more bothered about the losses than the fact that you lied about your entire hero career. And when you finally showed him the emergency signal from the Hero Association, his demeanor shifted. He got serious. You could see it in his eyes. His student might be in trouble, and for Saitama, that was all it took. You went with him to the scene, didn't say much along the way, just tried to focus on the mission and not on the fact that you were about to be in another life or death situation you had no business surviving. But when you got there, an elder centipede rose like a nightmare out of the ground. Something weird happened. You spoke. You said you brought Blast. The lie rolled off your tongue almost instinctively, like you were playing a character in a game. You shouted into the chaos, bluffing about secret Hero Association files, and warning the creature it had messed with the wrong people. The crowd might have believed it, maybe even the monster did, but your legs were trembling beneath you. Still, you had a role to play. You told Saitama to take him out in one clean shot. Avoid the mess, don't give it time to escape. Make it look like it all went according to plan. And then it charged. For a moment, your mind emptied. No thoughts, no backup plan, just sheer panic. You screamed Saitama's name, thinking that maybe this time your luck had finally run out. But it hadn't. The monster exploded into a smear of vapor and debris with a single punch, and you were left standing, somehow still alive. You looked over at him. He looked different, lighter, less tense. He said he felt relaxed. Later, when Genos asked him what he still lacked to beat the strongest enemies, Saitama said it plainly. Power. You felt your stomach sink. Genos nodded, scribbling in his little notebook like he was hearing gospel, and you sat there thinking, God, don't model yourself after this guy. Still, you kept showing up at his place. You were playing games again, Bang and Bomb resting nearby, Genos repairing himself like some futuristic IKEA furniture, and Fubuki trying to pull everyone back into serious business. She asked you if you could help with something, and you told her you were already busy. Time passed, night fell, and you were still gaming, Genos watching closely like he could learn something from your finger placement. When he detected high-speed movement, your heart skipped. You thought it was over. Again. He told you to deal with it. You got up, walked over, ready to face whatever came through the door, and it was Dr. Kuseno. You almost collapsed in relief. Everyone stayed over. Hot pot was bubbling, you went to grab something from the pot, and that's the last thing you remember. You woke up on the floor the next morning. Your head was pounding. Saitama didn't even ask if you were okay. He just told you to take out the trash. And you did. You were halfway home, garbage bag in hand, when a couple of Hero Association guys stopped you. They looked at the stains on your clothes, the tired look on your face, and asked if you'd been fighting all night in Z-City. You said nothing, you just gave them a look that made them back off. You knew the truth. You hadn't fought anything, but somehow they were still terrified of you. And that's where we'll end part 1 of this story. If you want to know what happens next, how King continues to stumble through the chaos, surrounded by gods and monsters, and somehow convinces the entire world he belongs among them, make sure to subscribe, because this is just the beginning.